Let's follow Sully, the cemetery spirit. He's going to guide us through Halloween Town. Welcome to Up All Night DIY. I'm Monica. Thanks for joining me. Me and Dawn of Shabby Meets Bling are hosting a bunch of our talented friends through Halloween Town for some spooky fun. Our special guest host is Annie of Crafting with Indiana Jones. You'll find a link to the playlist in the description box and pinned in the comments. You're in for a trick or treat. Let's get into it. I'm going to be using a lid to a cigar box. I used the rest of it a couple weeks ago in a different project. This will be the base for our tombstone, and I've painted the inside with a coat of white paint. This should get us started. I cut the facade of Sully's tombstone from MDF, but you could definitely use cardboard for this, or foam cardboard, anything like that would work. Okay, so what I'm going to do is give the rest of this lid a coat or two of Ceramcoat Rain Gray. And the facade, that's going to get a couple coats as well. To add some interest to the inside, I've cut the striped paper to fit inside my box, and I'm going to Mod Podge it into place, and I'm going to give it a top coat as well. I like to add a top coat of Mod Podge to paper because it makes it much more of a paintable surface. You know what I'm saying? Right, so I wanted to crunch this up a wee bit, so out comes my floating medium. I must apologize because I did not realize that the camera was off while I did this, but I smudged up the inside. So, I'll show you real quick what I did on this piece of paper. I prepped my brush by loading it up with the floating medium, then I'm going to side load with my paint, which is Hippo Gray. So, once I get that done, I stroke the brush on the plate. This will blend the medium with the paint in the bristles. And then I just float it around the area that we'll be able to see. And I kind of slapped some of the paint in the middle to grunge it up a wee bit. Nothing fancy. I just wanted to add a wee bit of age to it. Just a smidge. Now, you don't have to use floating medium for this. You could just dry brush it if you wanted. Maybe you have your own technique. But this is all I did. I just kind of went around the edge. I reloaded my brush when I needed to, and I just slapdashed it. So I'm just going to take a look here. I'll put the facade over top just to get an idea of my spacing. And then we're going to pull out the clay and make our clay characters. I'm going to use some Model Magic to create the clay pieces. And I've had a lot of people tell me that they've been struggling with Model Magic cracking. I haven't really had that problem, so if that's the case, maybe you prefer to use a different clay. I'm going to condition my clay by kneading it, and then I'm going to roll it into a ball. To make Sully, what I'm going to do is apply some pressure to one end of the clay to create Sully's tail. So I'll focus the pressure on the one end and kind of narrow that clay out. Now he's a ghost, so I want him to have a long tail, and I also want him to have a wee pointy bit at the top. That's my personal preference for my ghost. To create the wee pointy bit at the top, I pinch the clay on the top of my figure, and I just kind of pull it up, and then I'll roll it out a wee bit more. I'm going to keep rolling, narrowing both his tail and his point until I'm happy with it. I have here a card that's approximately the same size as the opening in our box, so I'm going to use this to measure Sully, make sure he'll fit. I use the palm of my hand to flatten him a wee bit, and I want to give his tail and his point a wee squiggle. So we'll just bend those into shape. Yeah, he's starting to look like a ghost. I want him to have those classic ghost, long, hollow eyes, so I'm going to use a ball tool to create them. I was going to give him a smile, but then I decided that he should have the classic ghost mouth too. So once again, I'll use my ball tool and just give him that elongated kind of hole, divot, whatever you want to call it. Now I'm going to roll out a snake of clay to make his arms. I'm narrowing the ends with like a soft point, and then I'm going to cut it in half. These are a wee bit long, so I'm going to cut just a wee bit more off. Let's see. I think that should be good. Right. Now let's push them into place. Once I get them on the side of his body, I'm going to roll over the seam where the arm meets the body, just to make sure that the clay is melted together, well adhered to one another. That makes sense, right? And now, of course, I'm going to repeat that process with this other arm. Yeah, so I was thinking I want him to be holding something. At first I thought maybe a pumpkin, but then I decided a candle would be better. So I took a piece of that clay that I had cut off, and I'm going to shape that into a little candle, just basically by flattening the ends. It was already pretty much the right shape for a candle. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good size, so we're going to go with that. So now I'm going to set these aside to let them dry overnight. I'm going to take that candle out. That's going to dry separately because we're going to add more to that later. I want to trim out the opening of this tombstone, and at the top here, we're going to make a little gargoyle out of clay. For the trim, I'm going to use this mold here. I think this will work nicely. I'm just going to use some hot glue to make this trim. It's quick and easy, dries really fast, so it's going to help me move the project along quicker. You know what I'm saying? I glued the facade to the box with wood glue and a dot of hot glue for that quick grab. You just want to be sure that when you put this together, that your bottoms line up and everything is level. I cut down my trim to fit around the opening of the tombstone, and I just used a pair of scissors for this. Worked perfectly. And once again, I'm going to use both wood glue and hot glue to attach the trim around the opening. Right, so I sketched out the gargoyle for the top of the tombstone, and I cut it from cardstock so that I can trace it onto some clay. I flattened my clay, and I'm going to use an X-Acto to cut out the gargoyle. I'm just going to lay him on top and trace right around him with the X-Acto knife. I'm going to lightly carve some features on him. I'll give him some eyes and hands and other details. I'm using this pointy clay tool. Do this just lightly, making an impression on the clay. I cut out a stencil from vinyl with my silhouette, and I'm going to use some Joe Sonia texture paste to add Sully's epitaph. It's simply going to say, "Here lies Sully." You can use spackling or joint compound for this, that would work too. But I had this on hand, and I really do like this stuff, so I'm just going to apply it with a palette knife. This is like spreading peanut butter on bread. I'm just spreading it on really lightly, covering up the lettering, and then I'm going to give it a moment or two to dry a tad, before removing the vinyl. And fingers crossed that it works. I'm impatient, so I'm hitting it with my heat gun here, just to kind of speed up the process a wee bit. I ever so gently peel up the vinyl. Hopefully the letters don't come up with it, but we're going to take our time. This is a wee bit messy, I must say. That looks pretty good. I'm glad I didn't wait much longer because I definitely think that the paste would have come up with the vinyl. I'm going to let that dry fully, and then I'll give it a coat of ring gray paint so that it matches the rest of the tombstone. In the meantime, I'll give the gargoyle 2 coats of ring gray as well. Right, okay, let's float in the gargoyle's wings. So I'm going to prep my brush with the floating medium. I'm side loading with Hippo Gray by scooping the paint onto the corner of my brush. I'll stroke the brush onto the plate to load the bristles and blend the medium with the paint. This gives me the gradient of color that I'm looking for. Darkest color is at the pink corner of my brush. The color fades as it moves towards the middle of the bristles. So I place the pink corner where I want my darkest shadow. I'll float in the shape of his wings, reloading my brush as needed. And then once I get them all shaded this way, I'll flip my brush around and reinforce the shading on the other side of the wings. Okay, I think I mentioned this last week that I got a new microphone because my other one died. This is supposed to be noise canceling, and I swear it picks up everything. My neighbor across the street, their dog is barking. And my windows are closed, and it sounds like the dog's in the living room with me. It's crazy. Now I'm going to float around the edge of the tombstone the same way, exact same way. I'm just loading my brush whenever I need to, and just kind of feathering out that color to add a little distress and interest. And again, if you don't want to float, you could definitely do this by dry brushing. There are other avenues you could just outline it. You do whatever you're comfortable with and that you think looks good. I'm going to float around the edge of the gargoyle too and try to pick up those details that I carved onto him. Right, let's attach him. I'm using Fabrifix and hot glue to affix him to the top of the tombstone. Sully and his candle are dry, but before I paint them, I'm going to add drips to his candle with a little hot glue. I'm just going to run it around the edge, adding the little drips, make it look like a melty candle. And now we're going to give the candle and Sully 2 coats of white paint. I give Sully's eyes and mouth 2 coats of Ceramcoat charcoal, my preferred color. And as I mentioned many times before, I prefer to use charcoal rather than black usually because I think it's softer. And this way, if I want to add shadow, I can do that with black. In this case, we're not adding shadow, but just as a general tip or something. Okay, so now let's do some dry brushing. First, I'm going to dry brush with Hippo Gray. I'm going to start with the trim. I really want to bring out all those details in that mold, so I'm really scrubbing it on there. Now let's hit the epitaph to make the lettering more visible. And again, I'm really kind of scrubbing it in there, but we're going to add more colors, which will, bring out the lettering even more. You'll see. And I'm also going to do some general distressing all over the tombstone, just for consistency's sake. Now I'm adding highlighting with Drizzle Gray, which is a much lighter gray. So I'm going to scrub in there, and again, really hit the lettering, bring out that Here Lies Sully. Of course, I'll do the trim and all over the tombstone until, I'm happy with the way it looks. We'll add some Jolie black wax to the distressing repertoire. I'm going to very lightly brush this on. I can always add more as I go. Just gonna lightly dust it over. This is really gonna help the letters stand out too. Yeah, see that? That's really bringing them out. Okay. To add sprinkles, I'll wet an old toothbrush, mix it with some charcoal paint. Just gonna mix it in there, kind of to an ink consistency. I'll tap it, and then I'm gonna run my thumb across the bristles, get those sparkles going. I'm gonna dab these big blotchy spots because I don't like them. Right, okay, so let's do it again, this time with drizzle gray. And anything big and splotchy, I'm gonna just blot that off. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. Tombstone is done. Time to grunge up Sully. So I'm gonna start with drizzle gray. I'm gonna build my color. I'm just dry brushing all over anywhere where I think it would look good. And we'll do the candle as well. Now I'm going to come back in with rain gray and grunge him up even more. I really want to hit those high points around his eyes and his mouth, as well as, the full edge all the way around in the crease of his point and his little tail squiggle. I'm going to get in there to add shading. I like my ghosts to be a little grubby. What about you? I think they're cuter that way. All the clay pieces are going to get a top coat of Mod Podge, just dabbing it on with a cosmetic sponge. And I did spray the tombstone with clear matte sealer. To make the flame for the candle, I tipped a bit of wire with hot glue, and then I just kind of, let it come up into a point. When it was dry, I painted it with a translucent orange paint. It's that gallery glass paint, the kind you make faux stained glass with. Anyway, I'm going to push it into the candle center. There we go. That really looks like a wee flame. Digging that. Right, so it's going to go in his hands like so, but I'm going to glue him to the tombstone with Fabrifix and hot glue before I add the candle. Now a little Fabrifix on the candle, and I'll situate that in his hands, and wee Sully is done. Here he is in all his spookiness. Sully, he's a sweet wee spirit, isn't he? He was fun to make. I might have to make some other graveyard characters. So I hope you like him. I want to thank my partner in crime, Dawn of Shabby Meets Bling, and our special guest host, Annie of Crafting with Indiana Jones. You'll find links to their channels in the description box. Many thanks to all of our talented friends who joined us for this romp through Halloween Town. You'll find their videos in the playlist, which is linked both in the description box and I pinned it at the top of my comments. Click that link and it'll rotate you right through the entire playlist. You'll find lots of fun and inspiring projects, so you don't want to miss it. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and all that good stuff. Stay creative, my friends. Thanks for hanging with me. See you next time. Up all night with Monica.